Chapter 881, A Play Translator, Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios. The Rose School of Thought demigod, who was hiding in the shadows, wore a hooded black robe and a golden mask with red and black patterns smeared across it. His figure couldn't be made out, but he was definitely not short, standing at a height of 1.8 meters. He used the Marauder Pathways sealed artifact to steal Tutmosis II's sarcophagus, placing it before him. Immediately, his body phased away and drew out an extended form as though he had turned into a thick, long, and soft rope. This transparent and nearly ethereal rope quickly bound the heavy sarcophagus in a bid to bring it into the spirit world. At this moment, a strong gust of wind sounded in the Rose School of Thought demigod's ears. They clashed in the air, forming an explosive-like stir. Boom! Tutmosis II's golden sarcophagus was sent flying as the transparent rope around it unfurled, shrinking back into a humanoid form. This Rose School of Thought demigod floated diagonally downwards in an uncontrollable manner before turning into a wraith, no, an evil spirit's form. He allowed the intense winds to blow through his body without making any additional movements. He saw eddies in the air swirl up rapidly as an unrestrained hurricane suddenly appeared, sweeping up the rocks, gravel, trash, and parts of the harbor's roof into the air. Even the carriage which had been autonomously moving before flew up because of its proximity. It was torn into pieces amidst the strong winds. Seemingly lucky, but in fact an expected outcome, the shadows where the Rose School of Thought demigod was hiding didn't have any lone soldiers and was far from the main path. The lady in the black evening gown and crown of thorns was obstructed by the hurricane as her body involuntarily wavered backward. She was unable to immediately rush to the golden sarcophagus that had been thrown up into the air, and she could only use her momentum to turn her body sideways, casting her gaze to a warehouse that stood far away outside the dock district. Immediately after that, she turned her head to look at the Rose School of Thought demigod because he wasn't affected by the hurricane. Confinement. The lady who was also wearing a golden mask raised her left hand and grabbed at her enemy's figure within her sights. The Rose School of Thought demigod had formidable spiritual intuition. As he sensed the danger with the help of his spiritual intuition, he did a mirror blink ahead of time, leaping onto a piece of glass about 80 meters away. At this moment, the hurricane seemed to stabilize itself and rapidly calmed down. Pa! 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 The items that had been swept up fell to the ground, including the golden sarcophagus that contained Tutmosis II. Bang! It slammed open a crater as it completely broke apart after suffering the wrath of the hurricane. The lid at the top flew up, scattering the gold and gems that were sealed in the top 2 layers of the sarcophagus as burial items. Then, the lower level of the sarcophagus tumbled a few times, dropping golden boxes and jade containers that stored the desiccated organs. A corpse that was bound in yellowish-brown cloth tumbled out. Its surface was covered in a dark red, oily liquid. This was none other than the mummy created after Tutmosis II passed away. It was extremely thin, and its face had a golden mask with patterns covering it just like the mask worn by the demigod from the Rose School of Thought. Embedded in its eye sockets were 2 abnormally pure onyx gems. The moment the mummy appeared, the surroundings seemed to dim. The sarcophagus's main body stopped as dark red liquid flowed out of it, soaking the nearby soil. When the Rose School of Thought demigod with the Marauder Pathways sealed artifact saw this scene, he was first enraged before he thought of something. The look in his eyes turned into pleasant surprise. His figure vanished from the glass fragment, phasing into the 2 onyx eyeballs of Tutmosis II. Then, he possessed the mummy and attempted to pull it into the spirit world. Suddenly, he sensed that the mummy in his evil spirit vision had vanished. Simultaneously, the Tutmosis II mummy with a slanted golden crown on its head suddenly bounced up, turning its onyx-embedded face towards the only lighthouse in Pritz Harbor. This pharaoh, which had been dead for centuries, produced an inhuman cry from its throat. Bound with yellowish-brown bandages, it freed its shriveled leg, strode and ran off. It seemed to be running towards freedom, but it had forgotten one thing. It was just a corpse. It should be lying down in silence. Tap. 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 The Tutmosis II mummy finished accelerating just as it began. Upon seeing this, the lady with the crown of thorns raised her right palm and aimed at the mutated mummy. "All the dead will receive their eternal peace," she said a few words in ancient Hermes. Bang! The Tutmosis II mummy exerted strength in its legs as it leaped up, jumping into another direction, escaping the region that would make it enjoy its eternal rest, doing so in a way that didn't adhere to a zombie's agility. Further away, the black-haired, golden-eyed man, who was pursuing Momosi, narrowed his eyes as his ring once again emitted a crystalline beam of light. His figure teleported in front of the mummy as he attempted to stop the deceased from moving away. However, Tutmosis II changed directions once again, charging out from a different angle. It kept changing its direction, as though its goal was to approach the lighthouse by following an irregular route. Momosi's heart stirred as his body suddenly vanished, flashing onto a piece of glass not far from the mummy. He used this as a springboard and finally appeared in the two onyx in Tutmosis II's eye sockets. Although the lone military's demigod had restricted possession, the Highlands Kingdom's pharaoh was no ordinary item. It had some spirituality remaining. Seeing his partner succeed, the demigod with the Marauder Pathway sealed artifact didn't hesitate to extend his black-gloved left hand, aimed it at the lady in the evening gown, and gripped his hand into a fist before turning it half a circle. The lady immediately felt her thoughts go adrift for a second. Following that, she was bound tightly by her own gown. Almost at the same time, the lone soldier far away on the warehouse rooftops found it difficult to control their rifles as they aimed in her direction and pulled their triggers. Bam! 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 The steel monsters with thick cannons also unleashed their cannonballs at the lady. The golden-eyed demigod didn't attempt to save his partner. Instead, he looked at Tutmosis II's mummy which had come to a stop because of Momosi's possession. He gripped his right hand into a fist and waved it abruptly. Execution. A look of joy flashed past his eyes because it didn't matter if the mummy died again, but Momosi couldn't afford that. Elsewhere, just as the bullets and cannonballs were to hit the lady, they suddenly slowed down as though they had sunken into a quagmire formed of air. They were repelled by a power that stemmed from laws. On the lady's head, the crown of thorns lit up suddenly, using up more than half of the accumulated ocean of light. The hooded Rose School of Thought demigod immediately discovered this as he vanished from a location far away from it, as though he was fundamentally wiped away. This also meant that he had arrived in front of the lady and saw her raise her right hand. Gathered within her right hand was pure condensed light. They transformed into a blazing spear that had two pure white wings sweep out at its tip, enveloping the spearhead like an angel's embrace. The Rose School of Thought demigod's eyes widened immediately as he heard the footsteps of death. He attempted to use Mirror Blink to leap away, but he found that his surroundings were sealed by the pure white wings. An intense sense of fear surged within him and inundated his reason, making him abandon his resistance towards his roots to his being and strength. At this moment, a shrieking wail sounded as the lady's eyes temporarily turned turbid. The blazing spear in her right hand deviated to the side as she failed to maintain its stability. It collapsed into a gorgeous blast of light as it was swept up in the air like a hurricane. And in the vicinity of the Tutmosis II mummy, Momosi had stopped his possession. Beside him, a dirty doll fell to the ground. The doll's chest had a tear that nearly penetrated it. It stood up and its eyeless face seemed to come to life, turning abnormally warped and gruesome. It continuously wailed with a shrieking tone, causing the nearby lone golden-eyed demigod to feel an invisible hand grabbing at his neck as he kicked and struggled in midair. It was because of this doll's existence that Momosi wasn't executed. Likewise, the other Rose School of Thought demigod wasn't struck by the blazing spear. When the latter saw this, he immediately used Mirror Blink to approach the Tutmosis II mummy that was still focused on moving in the direction of the lighthouse. He planned on using this opportunity to join forces with Momosi to achieve the goal of their operation. At this moment, the lady in the evening gown erased the distance, appearing directly above them. The crown of thorns on her head emitted the purest of light. She pressed down with her right hand and said, "This place will have the mysterious weakened and the real strengthened." Just as she said that, the blood-stained doll immediately lost its expression and stopped shrieking. The golden-eyed demigod from the lone military finally had a chance to catch a breather. He forcefully pulled away the hexed hand that was grappling his throat. From that moment, their demigod powers rapidly declined as attacks that stemmed from reality were rapidly boosted. This also meant that the lone soldiers at the top of the warehouse and the steam chariot that was slowly approaching on its treads were the victors in this battle. To the lone army, this was a situation where their advantage was extremely amplified. Momosi and the other Rose school of thought demigod immediately reacted. One of them tried to possess the mummy, while the other attempted to pick up the eyeless doll. They planned on escaping before their strength decreased to a certain threshold. Of course, the lady with the evening gown and the golden-eyed demigod couldn't allow the enemy to do as they wished, but just as they were about to take action, a light streaked into the sky and exploded into dreamy fireworks. Right on the heels of that, the two demigods felt their spiritual perception trigger simultaneously as they looked into opposite directions. A hand wearing a transparent glove reached out from the void beside Tutmosis II's golden sarcophagus, grabbing a handful of soil that was soaked with dark red liquid. The liquid was a mixture of Tutmosis II's brain matter and bodily fluids. It was a ritualistic material used to maintain its spirituality, and the latter contained its blood. Momosi and the Rose school of thought demigod, who wielded the sealed artifact, also looked over, and they happened to see a figure wearing a formal suit and top hat appear. This figure was bending his back to pick up the soil soaked with dark red liquid. During this process, he kept his right hand to his left breast, as though he was bowing towards the demigods. Then, maintaining this pose, he looked up to reveal his metal-gray masked face before rapidly fading away into nothingness. Carrying the iron cigar case in hand while passing through walls to leave the warehouse that she was hiding in, Sharon strictly followed Sherlock Moriarty's arrangements, using her state as a wraith to fly to the tallest building in Pritz Harbor, the lighthouse. Right on the heels of that, she silently counted down. 3, 2, 1. Before she could gather her thoughts, Sharon's ear resonated with an intense boom. The harbor in the distance seemed to be swept by a terrifying hurricane. She held the iron cigar case in her left hand as her nails suddenly grew sharp before stabbing into the wall of spirituality, completely destroying the invisible isolation with an attack filled with a wraith spirituality. A sudden gust of wind gushed outwards in every direction as Sharon suddenly felt her spirit body become augmented. And this stemmed from the item stored inside the iron cigar case. She wasn't affected by her curiosity, accustomed to restraining her emotions as she continued approaching the lighthouse at high speeds. During this entire process, she kept maintaining an irregular trajectory, occasionally lunging forward to the left or drifting upwards to the right. At times, she would rely on mirror blink to leap onto a different trajectory before continuing her approach to the target. This made it seem like she was dodging an invisible and terrifying enemy, but Sharon knew very well that nothing was chasing her, nor was she locked on by a distant attack. She felt as though she was performing in a one-man show without any opponents. However, she didn't have any doubts, nor did she waste any time to observe or wait. She pretended that within the air and her surroundings was the silent one Momosi and the lone military's demigods, doing her best to dodge and slip past them. As her flight continued, Sharon's blue eyes which were peeled towards the air had a red stream of light reflected in them. It flew from above, suddenly blasting apart, turning into beautiful fireworks that was a mix of red, orange, and yellow. Sharon immediately retracted her gaze. As she used her wraith fingernails to spew spirituality and reform the wall of isolation, she leaped towards the path Marek had laid. There were shattered mirrors placed at fixed distances in a periodic manner. With her dainty bonnet and black dress, her figure kept flashing to them, and soon, she appeared inside Marek's brown eyes. She then lightly took a stride out, the iron cigar case in her hand already encased with a wall of spirituality. Merrick and Sharon didn't converse, nor did they exchange looks with their eyes. As though they were being pursued by an invisible monster, they didn't dare stay put. Frankly speaking, they had a general idea about the role that each of their actions played. After all, Sherlock Moriarty had once attracted zombies and shadows with a copper whistle. As for Sharon's mirror blink, the two of them knew its traits well. However, they couldn't imagine how everything would develop. They had no idea how the detective with many secrets would be able to steal the Tuttensis II mummy under the watch of a few demigods. It wasn't a situation where the mummy could run if it wanted. The demigods were bound to stop it. At this moment, they saw a figure materialize. He wore a black formal suit and a half-top hat. His face was covered with an iron-gray mask, and in his hand was a handful of dark red soil and a dark brown book. It was none other than Sherlock Moriarty. Merrick immediately slowed down his pace. As he allowed the detective to smear the soil onto the book before pocketing it and grabbing his shoulder, he surveyed his surroundings. However, he didn't discover the existence of the Tuttensis II mummy. Did it ultimately fail? Having been mentally prepared for failure, he sighed as he watched himself, Sharon, and Sherlock Moriarty fade away and vanish from the spot. In the region where the demigods were fighting, the golden-eyed lone military demigod had an ominous feeling when he saw the gray-masked man bow before teleporting away. He felt that things had taken a drastic turn for the worse, into a terrible, unpredictable outcome. He needs to be stopped. Although I don't know what he did, he needs to be stopped. Such a thought instantly surfaced in his mind as the golden-eyed demigod immediately activated his ring. He used traveling against traveling, teleporting to pursue teleporting. However, in this short span of time, he realized that he was unable to lock onto the mysterious person's aura. In other words, he had either created an interference at the demigod level, or he had teleported somewhere very, very far away. Regardless of which possibility it was, it meant that any pursuit attempt would easily face failure. And more importantly, if he were to leaving the lady to fend against Momosi and the other Rose School of Thought demigod alone, that would be an extremely dangerous situation. After all, the mysterious power in the area had not weakened to the point where real firearms could pose a threat to their suppressed selves. Besides, there haven't been any losses yet. The mummy is still around, with the person only taking away some soil rich in spirituality. The golden-eyed demigod swept his gaze at the Tuttensis II mummy who was standing, blankly, in its spot, before casting his gaze back on Momosi. Suddenly, the mummy wrapped in yellowish-brown bandages that were soaked in dark red liquid had vanished from the four demigods' spiritual perception. The mummy had vanished without any warning. For a second, Momosi and the other demigods felt as though they had watched an interesting magic show or a play with a mischievous element in it. But sadly, as demigods, they couldn't tell how it was done. Moments later, having lost their target, Momosi and the other Rose School of Thought demigod didn't hesitate to make their figures fade away in a bid to escape via the spirit world. The golden-eyed demigod and lady tried hard to stop them. After 2 teleports, Klein returned to a 2-bedroom apartment in Backland which they had rented ahead of time with Sharon and Merrick. "I will pay you based on what we agreed upon," Sharon said just as she found her footing. At the same time, she returned Sherlock Moriarty the iron cigar case. They had previously agreed that regardless of the outcome, Sharon would provide him with the information regarding spirit world plunderers. If they succeeded, she would pay another 3,500 lone gold coins or £5,000. Klein received the iron cigar case which had corrosive signs on its surface. As he held it in his hand, he sensed Azek's copper whistle lightly jumping inside. He quickly put it away and gave Sharon and Merrick a smile. "Might I trouble you to wait outside? Give me 5 minutes." His tone is very firm. It's as if he has succeeded. What can he do in 5 minutes? It's impossible for him to teleport again and bring back the Tuttensis II mummy. This will be more dangerous and more difficult than before. Merrick was filled with puzzlement as his footsteps moved at an obviously slow pace. As for Sharon, she had floated to the wooden door which separated the rooms and passed through it. Merrick quickly reined in his thoughts and followed closely behind by walking out the door. Klein maintained a smile as he watched them. Then, he teleported to another cheap motel in East Borough. He had disguised himself to rent this room in the afternoon. Right on the heels of that, he took out the book with the dark brown cover which was stained with dark red mud stains. It was Grozel's Travels. As long as the blood still had remnant spirituality and hadn't coagulated, smearing it across the cover would allow the target to be pulled into the book world. And inside the Tutmosis II mummy's golden sarcophagus contained such blood. It also meant that, at this moment in time, the mummy was already in Klein's hands, inside Grozel's Travels. After hearing Merrick describe the procedure to making a pharaoh mummy, Klein had roughly come up with a plan. It was to use the corpse's attraction to Azek's copper whistle as spirit body threads. He then controlled the mummy and used this marionette to lead the demigods away from the vicinity of the sarcophagus. He did this so that he could teleport over to retrieve the blood and create the necessary conditions. He had never thought of directly taking the mummy away or getting it to run out of the harbor successfully. It wasn't pragmatic to think that, as it would involve directly facing the attacks from the demigods. And even if he, Merrick, and Sharon were together, it was still beyond their capabilities. It might not even work even if he spent a large sum of money to summon Miss Messenger Rionette Tinker. Therefore, despite Azek's copper whistle and the mummy's reanimation appearing to be the goal and plan, it was in fact simply a method to manipulate and misdirect. This allowed the other actors to ignore the situation of the golden sarcophagus. This was a plot that even demigods couldn't fend off. This was because they were protecting the mummy and not the sarcophagus. They were targeting the high-sequence Beyonders from the Rose School of Thought, and not three people who were loitering around in the distance with unknown goals. Klein's plan wasn't a plan that was highly interdependent. It was amazingly light and lean while still allowing the plan to be carried out even if there was a tiny accident. He had very few parameters he needed to take into account. As long as the hurricane successfully toppled the sarcophagus, as long as Sharon followed his instructions and moved in an irregular trajectory, and as long as the military didn't have the manpower to easily finish off the Rose School of Thought demigods, all he needed was to wait for an opportunity to appear. After the demigods left the vicinity of the sarcophagus and that the mummy wasn't possessed by the evil spirit, all he needed to do was teleport over and retrieve something that was soaked in the liquid before escaping. This didn't need him to worry about the exact developments of the demigod battle. He didn't care who gained the upper hand or was injured. He also didn't need the Tutmosis II mummy to run a certain distance to consider it a victory. As long as it started moving and became difficult to be caught, there wasn't any problem. Towards the end, his bow was partly to make it easy to scoop up the soil as a curtain call, and also partly to press Grozel's Travels to his chest. If any accidents happened, he could immediately pull it out and use it as a shield. It was precisely because of this that Klein could smear the blood-soaked soil across the cover just as he teleported. Everything ran as expected. The directing was quite a success. As Klein reflected over the matter, he felt his potion's digestion accelerate. He didn't delay as he quickly set up a ritual. He sacrificed Grozel's Travels above the grey fog, and then in his spirit-body state, he brought Creeping Hunger, Azek's copper whistle, the Soul Assurer's Beyonder characteristic, and Sharon's anti-hex golden bead into the book world. Chapter 883, Demigod's Appraisal Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios in the book world. Just as Klein appeared in the city outskirts, he immediately took out remnant parts of the dark red soil and picked up a withered branch. Using rod divination, he found the Tutmosis II mummy. He was worried that this manifestation of hexes would harm the residents here. Although the book world didn't have any lack of sequence 5 Beyonders, and the Tutmosis II mummy remained in a muddled state having lost the stimulus from Azek's copper whistle, it was still a demigod when it was alive. The hexes that its corpse produced after his death were bound to be extraordinary. Even Klein himself didn't dare approach it if not for the anti-hex golden bead that Sharon had given him. Of course, Klein had also weighed the consequences before deciding on using Grozel's travels to steal the mummy. His previous experiences and the encounters of others had proven one thing: outsiders would not directly appear before the natives when they entered the book world. It required exploration before any contact was made. This was especially so for the first time. Therefore, Klein believed that the mummy was likely left somewhere uninhabited. And with this zombie's condition, it was likely to be engaging in a random walk. It would be difficult for it to explore in different directions autonomously like humans, elves, or giants. This also meant that, as long as he didn't drag it out, it wasn't likely for there to be any losses. Furthermore, it had only been about 3 minutes since Klein smeared the blood-soaked soil across the book's cover. Following the direction led by Rod divination, Klein flew towards a nearby mountain peak. Soon, he came to a valley. At this moment, the Tutansis II mummy wrapped in yellowish-brown bandages and was dyed red from liquids had appeared. It was still wearing the golden mask with patterns across it. Its throat was letting out an inhuman sound as it rushed over with wide strides. The surroundings turned gloomy. At the same time, many incomplete animal carcasses tore away the soil covering them in the valley as they staggered towards Klein. Having his spirit body augmented by Azek's copper whistle, Klein immediately chuckled. What a warm welcome. He unhurriedly threw away the branch and raised a blob of black matter. This was a Soul Assurer's Beyonder characteristic which he had released from the mutated version of Creeping Hunger. At its core was pure shimmering light that looked like a night sky embedded with stars. Invisible waves spread out in a turbulent manner as the surroundings suddenly darkened as though night had fallen at once. The serene and peaceful feeling was accompanied by the fall of starlight. The animal carcasses first turned sluggish before collapsing, returning to their eternal rest. The mummy also slowed down its pace, its motions growing slower and slower. But it didn't lie back down. Directly using a Beyonder characteristic isn't very effective after all. Furthermore, the negative effects are nothing trivial. Klein couldn't help but cover his mouth with his left hand to yawn. He made Creeping Hunger turn pale and become dyed in a gloomy green. It used the power of a zombie to control the deceased in front of him. The two stacked Beyonder effects finally calmed the mummy down. With embedded onyx gems for eyes, it slowly walked to Klein's side and stood there silently as though it was the most professional servant. Unfortunately, it has hexes. From inside his spirit body, Klein immediately took out a golden bead with the styles of the ancient Highlands kingdom. On its surface was deeply engraved bluish-green patterns. It came from Sharon and was specially prepared for the Tutansis II mummy. It could effectively suppress and put an end to the hexes. Otherwise, how could the wraith dare to cast her sights on the pharaoh mummy? After twiddling the golden bead, Klein made the Tutansis II mummy open its mouth before stuffing the bead into the mask's gap where the mouth was. In just a few seconds, the gloominess of the surroundings vanished. After doing all of this, he took a step forward and, with his spirit body state, possessed the mummy. Then, without any hesitation, he ended the summoning and returned above the grey fog. This mummy had already become his zombie, allowing him to release it just like he did with his former marionette, Senor. There was no need for him to store it in his body. After doing a bestowment, the mummy which was rich in spirituality returned to the real world and arrived inside the cheap motel. After Klein cleaned up the traces, he reached out his right hand, about to grab the mummy's shoulder and teleport back to the two-bedroom apartment where Merrick and Sharon were. But after taking a look at the oil-stained yellowish-brown bandages and the dark red liquid on it, Klein silently retracted his right hand and switched to using his gloved left hand. After holding the mummy's shoulder with his left hand, he immediately began to fade, and this effect quickly spread across his body. In just a flash, Klein and the mummy had returned to the apartment from before. He wasn't in a rush to open the door to present it to Sharon and Merrick. He took out his golden pocket watch and opened it. Another 36 seconds before it's 5 minutes. Klein made the mummy pull out a chair and sit down leisurely. After a while, he finally heard a knock on the door. "Come on in," Klein replied with a smile as he controlled the mummy to walk over. When the door creaked open, the thin figure with the golden, patterned mask and yellowish-brown bandages was reflected in the duo's eyes. This figure's onyx gems shimmered before it swiftly lay itself down on the ground. Momentarily, Sharon and Merrick were at a loss for words. Having already used a wall of spirituality to isolate Azek's copper whistle, Klein dispelled his control over the zombie and pointed at it with a smile. "I'm leaving the rest to you. And that brings the curtain down for my directed play." Klein commented inwardly as he silently took in the sensation of his potion rapidly digesting. This made him believe that it didn't need to take him up until the end of the year to consider the problem of advancing to the level of a demigod. It might be expedited by 2 or even 3 months. Furthermore, with this digestion, the number of marionettes he could control finally rose to 2. The maximum limit reached 200 meters. Faced with enemies with the same level of spirit body as his, gaining initial control of the target and completely converting them into a marionette was respectively reduced to 10 seconds and 150 seconds. The range had also been expanded to 10 meters. "You really succeeded." Merrick's eyes stared at the Tuttensis II mummy as he couldn't help but mutter. He could never have imagined that they could succeed. Sherlock Moriarty had managed to successfully steal something 4 demigods and 2 terrifying sealed artifacts were vying for. Furthermore, this gentleman had previously returned empty-handed. Could it be that the mummy had delivered itself? Deep inside Sharon's blue eyes, her emotions were concealed and they were completely calm. She scrutinized the target. After confirming that it was the pharaoh mummy and that it was Tuttensis II, she cast her gaze to Sherlock Moriarty who was seated with his legs crossed. She opened her mouth slightly before closing them. "Thank you. I'll mail you the corresponding payment." "I'll wish you, all the best in everything," Klein replied sincerely. He then silently had a poignant thought. If Miss Sharon can successfully advance to Sequence 4, it means I'll have an additional demigod-level helper. The saying from the Foodaholic Empire is apt: rely on your parents at home, depend on your friends when out. The more demigod-level friends, the merrier. Our tarot club needs to develop more friends and reduce our enemies. However, my enemies seem to be ever increasing. Having thought of that, Klein exhorted them. Be careful of being hunted down. The Tuttensis II mummy had too many of its items in the lone military's possession. It was very simple for them to use Beyonder methods to lock onto it. Klein's paper angel interference was only effective for a limited amount of time. Of course, he believed that Sharon and Merrick were prepared, otherwise, they wouldn't have had thoughts on stealing the pharaoh's mummy. Likewise, he also believed that they could deal with the origins of the grey metal masks and special fireworks. If it's Danitz, he would most likely say, it didn't cross my mind. Klein did a comparison with a particular hunter failure. Sharon nodded, indicating that she would take note. Then, she made the Tuttensis II mummy into her zombie and brought it into the spirit world. Thank you for your help. Merrick, who stayed behind in the room, exhaled. He composed his surging emotions and bowed at Sherlock Moriarty. Following that, he left the room, removed his disguise, and blended into the crowd in East Borough. During this process, Klein remained sitting in his chair as he silently watched them leave. At some point in time, his figure also vanished. In an apartment near Pritz Harbor. The lone military's golden-eyed demigod entered and said to his partner, the lady in the evening gown, nothing for now. That's expected. If he wasn't certain of success, that mysterious person wouldn't have come to steal the Tuttensis II mummy, the lady said in a heavy voice. However, we can relax our investigation scope. Those fireworks, that mask, those clothes, and that taunting bow should lead us to something. She was certain that the Tuttensis II mummy's loss wasn't done by the 2 Rose school of thought demigods. If it was part of their plan, there was no need for them to carry out that step only when they were in dire straits. They had almost failed to escape. The golden-eyed demigod nodded and said, "I had a premonition that something would happen, but unfortunately, we didn't work with the churches for this operation. We didn't have enough manpower." He paused and asked, "Have you figured out what method that mysterious person used?" The lady held up the crown of thorns and stabbed a thorn into her neck. As blood trickled down, she shook her head. "Perhaps the removing of the soil with the Tutmosis II mummy's bodily fluid is a ritual. This is a very cunning fellow who's good at deceit." Chapter 884, Destined Encounter. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. The golden-eyed demigod from the lone military nodded in agreement. "Indeed. It's similar in style to certain fellows from the Intis intelligence agencies. However, just seconds after he took away the soil, the Tutmosis II mummy vanished. It's unlikely that he could complete a ritual in time." The lady looked down at the crown of thorns that was embedded in her neck. Slightly slow to react, she said, "Perhaps he, or they, had already set up the other steps of the ritual. Once he teleported back, he immediately threw the soil onto the altar, completing the final step. Of course, it's not necessarily a ritual. It might also be a sealed artifact that achieves a certain effect with the help of bodily fluids. There are too many possibilities for this. Although sealed artifacts' main effects and negative effects mostly adhered to the sequence traits of the 22 pathways, allowing researchers to barely come up with a hypothesis, just like how everyone had different personalities, sealed artifacts were different. Perhaps due to fusing with an object, the environment when formed, the possible existence of a high-level sequence's aura, or a curse from the original owner, these resulted in all kinds of strange traits that made them not viable for testing. No one could imagine ahead of time the different permutations and list them all out. The golden-eyed demigod pulled out a chair and sat. "This is very difficult to investigate, so we can temporarily not consider it. However, you missed out on a direction for the investigation. Do you still remember that hurricane? It swept up Tutmosis II's sarcophagus, causing the ritualistic items, which is also the bodily fluids, to leak out, and it also caused the mummy to tumble out. This enabled the condition for zombifying it. In short, this established the foundation for the subsequent development, so it can be confirmed that this was done by the mysterious man or his helper." The turbidness in the lady's eyes grew faint as she slowly removed the crown of thorns. "Do you mean that, with the Church of Storms in control of the Sailor pathway and the high-sequence formulas and Beyonder characteristics, there won't be many Beyonders or mystical items that can use hurricane? Thus, this is a clue that we can follow to find their trail." The golden-eyed demigod nodded. "Also, I remember that not long ago, there was a case in East Borough. The Aurora Order's Mr. X was assassinated at a gathering he convened himself. Lightning storm and hurricane had been used at the scene. This garnered a lot of attention from the Church of Storms, and they have been constantly looking for clues. To have two hurricanes happen in the same area in a short period of time and not belong to official organizations, this can't be a coincidence. I believe it can be preliminarily determined that there is a connection. The group of people who killed Mr. X and stole the mummy might be one and the same. We need to join forces with the Church of Storms to investigate." The lady lowered the crown of thorns and thought. "That's a good angle. Also, from their goals and motives, we can figure out certain things. People who want to use a mummy as a zombie wouldn't take such a high risk by attempting a theft. I suspect that, to those people, the Tutmosis II mummy is something they attach additional importance to. Something that's key to a ritual." The golden-eyed demigod deliberated as he said, "From the scene, the one who was carrying something special to attract the mummy was likely a wraith or had the corresponding mystical item. Combining the goals and motive, I have a theory." The lady's heart stirred as she blurted out, "Members of the temperance faction that escaped from the Rose School of Thought?" "Yes." The golden-eyed demigod nodded. Although the creation of mummies is influenced by aspects like the faith in death and sun worship, despite the Rose school of thought occupying a ruling position in the Highlands, Valley, and other places, it hasn't forbidden such burial practices. This implies that mummies are of use to them. Perhaps it's the ritual requirement of one of the sequences. Upon saying this, he chuckled in a self-deprecating tone. There's another possibility. To show off and act. That bunch of people might not really want the mummy. It just happened to satisfy certain conditions, giving them the opportunity to steal. Hence, they did a grand act. To some sequences of particular pathways, this is key to digesting the potion. As a demigod, he was knowledgeable, so he naturally made many connections. The lady deliberated and said in a heavy voice, I suspect that it's not just one possibility but a potpourri of reasons. We shall use this as the foundation for our investigations. Backlund, Sherwood Borough. In a building near the Tussock River. The silent one Mimosi sat in front of a square table that had a tablecloth spread across it with golden nails placed on it. It said in a deep voice, Zatwin, who do you think stole the Khedive mummy? Not far behind him, a figure rapidly appeared on a piano bench. This figure wore a black clergyman's robe with a black glove on his left hand. His face was thin, and his skin color was brown. His eyes were recessed like a dried corpse. His mustache hair was black at the root and white outwards. They extended from his mouth all the way to his ear. However, it wasn't thick and was rather short. It appeared rather sparse. Zatwin's eyes were close to his skin color. Despite having the bearing of a priest, he gave off a cold and terrifying feeling. He appeared to be someone who would transform amidst silence. Thinking, he said, there are only a handful of people who yearn for a Khedive mummy and would be willing to take the risk to battle demigods. And here in Backlund, there's only Sharon. She has likely received Rionette Tynker's help, otherwise, it's impossible for her to succeed. Mimosi picked up a golden nail covered in dense patterns. After a few seconds of silence, he said, who was the one who teleported? It doesn't resemble Gehrman Sparrow. Another helper Sharon hired? Perhaps. Zatwin coughed as his pale face flushed blue. I believe we need to think of a way to pray to Mother Tree. We should be able to receive a revelation. Mimosi nodded gently and stabbed the golden nail through his bottom lip. Upon seeing this, Zatwin covered his mouth and slowly got up. He staggered down to the first floor in preparation to leave and return to his hideout. On the first floor, he saw a dark environment with shimmering candlelight. The fragrance of food wafted from different directions, filling the air. The residential buildings in the nearby area were terraces. Facing the street on the first floor were shops. The contact point of the Rose School of Thought was in a restaurant which mainly served Southern Continent cuisine. As he had suffered quite serious injuries in the operation, Zatwin didn't wish to maintain his state as an evil spirit. It was too great a burden on the injured him, therefore, he had changed into a black clergyman's robe as he hobbled to the entrance. At this moment, a customer walked into the restaurant. This customer wore a black formal suit with black pants and leather shoes. He had a pair of black eyes and a thin face. He had a slightly broad forehead as he wore a monocle and a very tall top hat. As he casually glanced around, his gaze landed on Zatwin. Upon seeing the black glove Zatwin was wearing on his left hand, the ends of the customer's mouth curled slightly. He shook his head with a smile, seemingly a little disappointed. Then, he entered the restaurant, brushing past Zatwin who had stared back with a maleficent look. Zatwin didn't pay too much attention as he walked out and reached the streets. Under the illumination of the street lamps, the night's cool breeze blew at him, causing the Rose School of Thought demigod to suddenly tremble. Zatwin knew that this was a result of his spiritual perception being triggered. With his heart tightening, he immediately looked down at his hands, surprised to realize that the black glove on his left hand was gone. Gone. As a demigod, Zatwin didn't know when the sealed artifact on his hand disappeared. He quickly turned around and looked into the restaurant as the image of the man from before suddenly surfaced in his mind. Soon, he locked onto the target's aura and found that he was still inside the restaurant. The man had even called out to the waiter to bring him a menu. Zatwin originally had thoughts of using Mirror Blink to possess the man. But for some unknown reason, his hands shook involuntarily. In an indescribable manner, he believed that a dangerous and terrifying enemy hid in his surroundings. Just as this thought flashed past his mind, Zatwin subconsciously took a step to the side, walking to the end of the street as though nothing had happened. In an apartment in Sherwood Borough, Furs was reading the latest issue of Ladies' Aesthetic when she suddenly heard a key turn and the sound of the door opening. "Why are you so late today?" She looked towards the door where Zio stood. Zio ruffled her short blonde hair and said, "When I was almost home, I saw a meet-up mark from MI9. It was urgent." "What happened this time?" With piqued interest, Furs lowered the magazine in her hand. A continuation of Mr. X's assassination. Zio bent down to switch to her home slippers and said in passing. The look on Furz's face froze as her eyes darted about slightly. "Any clues?" "Not really. Back then, a hurricane at the demigod level appeared. It's not common outside the Church of Storms, and just earlier tonight, there was a small-scale hurricane attack at the dock at Pritz Harbor. A pharaoh mummy was stolen away in the chaos," Zio explained simply. MI9 suspect that the two cases were done by the same group of people, so they are pressing informants like us to work harder at gathering intel and finding clues. My Laymanos Travels still has a hurricane. Mr. German Sparrow? Why is he stealing a pharaoh mummy? Furs forced a smile. Perhaps it was done by the Church of Storms. Zio rolled her eyes at her and quickly walked into the kitchen in search of food. Early morning, 160 Buckland Street. Moments after Klein finished washing up, and before he could open the door to let Richardson in, his spiritual perception was triggered. He saw Miss Messenger's headless body walk out of the void with 4 heads in hand. One of them was biting down on a rather thick envelope. Opening its mouth, a large pile of gold coins was spat out. "I can finally repay my debt." Klein glanced at Rionette Tynker's 4 necklace heads and said in relief, "I remember still owing you 3,413 gold coins. You can take the last installment away." Meanwhile, he had the baffling feeling that the pile of gold coins looked familiar. However, he didn't think too much about it because all the gold coins looked familiar to him. Upon hearing Klein's words, one of the 4 heads which Rionette Tynker held immediately said, "All right." It opened its mouth and immediately sucked back most of the gold coins. Where it was stored was an unknown. Taking a look at the dozens of shiny gold coins left, Klein reached out to receive the rather thick envelope. He quickly opened it and scanned its opening. Indeed, it was the detailed information regarding Spirit World plunderers. After Miss Messenger returned to the Spirit World, he put away the gold coins, drew the curtains, and sat down under the morning sun, seriously reading the neat and tidy handwriting. "Thank you once again for your help. The Tutensis II mummy is part of the advancement ritual for me. It holds deep meaning for me. Spirit World plunderers live in the depths of the Spirit World. They're extremely rare, rich in intelligence, and very aggressive. They can capture or kill creatures and make them soul avatars. Their souls can turn into their true soul's appearance, giving them similar performance and traits. They can also disguise themselves as other Spirit World creatures. When encountering them, perhaps all the Spirit World creatures around belong to them. They might be soul avatars that mustn't be neglected. This creature can effectively influence the thought processes of their prey, causing them to enter a desensitized state. Their true soul body has potent spirituality. In clashes of such nature, they are often at a noticeable advantage. They're very difficult to find. At present, there is only one place with signs of their activity. The Spirit World's Calderon City. This is a legendary city of mysterious and unknown origins. On this front, there are 3 theories about them. One is that it was once Death's residence, the entrance to the underworld. 2. It's the divine kingdom left behind by a dead ancient deity from the second epoch. Attracted by the spirit world, it sank and slowly transformed into a real yet illusory city. 3. It's a real city that was devoured by the spirit world during the cataclysm. Regardless of the theory, it elucidates one point: this city is very dangerous. It has many special and strange aspects about it. I do not have the mysticism coordinates of Calderon City. Most high-level spirit world creatures aren't aware either. I can provide 2 suggestions. First is to use a special secret deed ritual to pray to Red Light Ire Moria to receive the corresponding answer. I won't describe in detail what red light is. If you aren't aware, you can write to ask me again. The second is to find someone from the Abraham family. They have the legacy of the traveler's pathway, and they have done a deep exploration of the spirit world. Even when writing a letter, Miss Sharon exudes an extremely restrained feeling. Indeed, the pharaoh mummy is meant for the puppet's ritual. Back then, the evil spirit in the ruin had said that it could be one of the components of the ritual. Therefore, the ritual's exact requirement is to use a high-sequence Beyonder's corpse after death, one that still maintains a level of spirituality, or to use an evil spirit that results from the resentment of death. Heh, can I pray to Orange Light to get him to help me ask Red Light? To others, finding Calderon City is a very difficult task, but to me, it's extremely simple. I can directly give this task to Miss Magician. She has just contributed greatly to the Abraham family. I hope the first theory about Calderon City is correct. That way, once I make contact with Mr. Azek, I can see the dangerous residents of this mysterious city line up in 2 rows as they welcome me. Klein shook his head, throwing such a beautiful fantasy to the back of his mind. He scrutinized the information regarding spirit world plunderers and confirmed that they had partial characteristics of marionettist and bizarro sorcerer. They were rather dangerous high-level spirit world creatures. To make soul avatars have the same appearance, performance, and traits of their true souls is identical to a bizarro sorcerer's ability to give their powers to a marionette. At Zeradal's level, perhaps at sequence 3 Scholar of Your, perhaps he can temporarily give certain Beyonder powers to other creatures that are marionettes? Klein began tearing the letter while in thought as he flicked his wrist and engulfed the letter in scarlet-red flames, burning them into ashes that fell into the trash bin. After reining in his thoughts, while dressed in pajamas, he walked to his bedroom's door to get Richardson to come in to help him change his clothes. Under St. Samuel Cathedral. As usual, Leonard Mitchell was leaning back into his chair with his legs raised on the desk. There was nothing abnormal about his expression, but he was thinking about Amon deep down. Ever since he knew that the angel had arrived in Backlund, Palaz Zoroast inside him had become abnormally silent. He wasn't as active as before to proactively speak or give suggestions. If not for the answers he received when he posed questions, Leonard would have even suspected that Old Man had secretly sneaked off to find another host to parasitize. Amidst his thoughts, his Red Gloves captain, Nighthawk's deacon, Soest, walked in. How was the interrogation? Any results? The Red Gloves in the room who were dealing with their own matters quickly cast their gaze to the door. Late last night, they had just finished a mission. They had captured 3 numinous episcopate members that they had been tracking for quite some time. Now, they were awaiting the results of the interrogation. Soas sternly surveyed the room and said, "We had contributed greatly in this, but the results aren't something good. Based on the testimony of the 3 numinous episcopate members, as well as the information the Church had previously gathered, we can come to a preliminary conclusion that the numinous episcopate has fractured between reviving death or creating artificial death. The latter has already achieved some progress and benefited significantly from it. They are filled with animosity towards Lone and to us. They plan to put parts of the experiments of artificial death in Backlund. Yes, their thoughts are the same as your present concerns. Even if the experiment fails, there's a chance of severely damaging the capital of capitals." Leonard instantly snapped out of his daze as he exchanged looks with Cindy and Bob, seeing the surprise and rage in each other's eyes. At this moment, Soest rapped the side of the table to stop the members from further discussion. He cleared his throat and said, "Our new mission is to head to the southern continent to find the key members of the Numinous Episcopate's artificial death faction based on clues gleaned from the testimonies we received. We need to figure out how many remnant thorns are left in Backland before uprooting each and every one of them. We will receive help from Ma'am Daly on this mission. And the church will give her the potion as an advanced payment, helping her prepare the ritual so that she can become a gatekeeper before she heads off. In addition, the high-ranking deacon in charge of the southern continent, Her Excellency, the goddesses Ilia, and the local Nighthawks, will provide us with help, giving us the corresponding sealed artifacts and helping us with the preliminary investigations. Ladies and gentlemen, head back to rest for a day and prepare yourselves. We will set off tomorrow night." "Yes, Captain." Cindy, Bob, and company stood up and replied. Leonard stood up as well, but he didn't say a word. The first thought that flashed in his mind was, "I can use this opportunity to leave Backland to escape the threat of Amon." After returning to 7, Pinster Street, he asked with a suppressed tone after closing the door and drawing the curtains, "Old man, problem solved? I believe a normal assignment for red gloves won't garner the suspicion of Amon, right?" The slightly aged voice in his mind replied slowly, "No." Leonard could tell that old man's voice appeared much more relaxed. As his mind stirred, he considered for a moment and said, "Should I write to Klein Moretti and tell him that we will be leaving Backland for a very long period of time? After all, he was the one who warned us that Amon is here." Palaz Zoroast replied in the same tone, "Write it if you wish." Leonard exhaled, pulled out a piece of paper, and picked up a fountain pen. He deliberated for a moment and lowered his wrist to write, "I have a mission that will require me to leave Backland." Looking at this short sentence, Leonard put down his pen and folded the letter. Soon, he finished preparing the ritual to summon the messenger. He lit a candle, took a step back, and said in ancient Hermes, I summon in my name, the spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the friendly creature that can be subordinated, the messenger that belongs to Gehrman Sparrow." The howling of wind sounded in the room as it turned intense. The candlelight burgeoned as it was tainted with paleness. A beautiful blonde, red-eyed head appeared from within. Leonard pricked his brows, and just as he was about to speak, he saw that what followed the head wasn't a complete neck, but a hand grabbing the hair. Rionette Tynker, in her dark and complicated dress, quickly walked out. The four heads in her hand turned in unison to look at Leonard Mitchell as they spoke one after another. "You want to send a letter? This spirit world creature looks powerful. This is a perk that Klein has for joining that secret organization." As Leonard thought, he nodded and said, "Yes." The four heads held by Rionette Tynker spoke one after another. "You need to pay 1 gold coin, 1 gold coin. Messengers from the mysterious world also collect money." Leonard was somewhat astounded but was at a loss for a reaction. All he could do was reach into his pocket and take out a gold coin. Only then did Rionette Tynker raise two of her blonde, red-eyed heads to grab the letter and gold coin. Following that, she stepped into the void and vanished. After the candle was restored to normal, Leonard muttered with a laugh, "What a strange messenger." Just as he said that, the slightly aged voice of Palaz Zoroast echoed in his mind. "It's best you do not speak negatively behind her back." Her old man actually addressed a messenger as a her. A messenger can be a her. Leonard's eyes widened immediately. Palaz coughed slightly. "Her state is very strange, not better than mine. In short, that organization that believes in the fool is more, when making contact or cooperating with Klein Moretti, it's best you be more careful." After saying that, the parasite fell silent without saying another word. Leonard actually wants to use a mission to leave Backland so as to avoid the threat from Amon. This is an idea the grandpa came up with. That's way too cowardly, no? Klein scanned the letter he received and silently muttered. He began seriously considering the idea of using the arms deal as an excuse to quickly leave Backland for a period of time. Chapter 886, Preparations before leaving. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. After some consideration, Klein, who already had such a plan, smoothly cleared up his thoughts and decided on his plan of action. Pa! He flicked the piece of paper in his right hand, looking up from the soaring scarlet flames at Rionette Tinker. He planned on taking out a lone gold coin to provide payment. However, Miss Messenger had already left. There was no one in front of him. Not collecting payment? Klein was first taken aback before he made the connection. He suspected that Rionette Tinker had proactively asked for payment after being used to collecting gold coins from non-contractees. Perhaps Miss Messenger didn't say anything, she just stared at Leonard with those 8 eyes on the foreheads of hers while waiting for him to pay the gold coin. Yet, this fellow didn't realize it at all, trying to forcefully end the summon, only to have his neck snapped. Klein hissed in alarm as he used the gold coin he had just taken out to do the divination. He received the result that Leonard Miss Messenger was still alive and doing fine. He breathed a sigh of relief, put away the gold coin, and called out, "Richardson." The half-opened room's door opened without a sound as Richardson walked in and politely asked, "Sir, how may I be of service? Please bring the butler here." As Klein instructed, he sighed inwardly. He had really been spoiled by the luxurious life. Even when getting someone at home, he wouldn't take even half a step. He had to do it through his valet. "Well, this is an acting requirement," he said silently to himself. Minutes later, the white-gloved Walter came to the 3rd floor and let his arms hang to his side. He stood in a standard posture to the side of Dwayne Dantes, awaiting his employer's instructions. Klein had already considered his words, so he unhurriedly said, "Go to Member of Parliament Mock's place to inform him that I've prepared the first installment. Also, prepare a carriage. I will be heading to the Bursary Foundation in the morning and will return in the afternoon. If Member of Parliament Mock doesn't have time for me in the afternoon, head over to Dr. Aaron's place, saying that I'll pay a visit in the afternoon." Klein had already taken out £10,000 from above the grey fog and had stored it in a tiny leather briefcase. He was waiting for the opportune time to complete the preparation work of the arms deal transaction. And to air the cache of the grey fog's smell, he had deliberately teleported to the sea, feeding creeping hunger in passing. He was afraid that Amon, who also knew of the grey fog's existence, would detect the special smell while being in the same city, thus, seeking out the location of the treasure he was yearning for. "All right, sir." Walter didn't ask his employer how he had gathered the first installment. If memory served him right, Dwayne Dantes hadn't been to the bank recently. Of course, this wasn't something to be bothered with. Often, foreigners, especially tycoons from Desi or Mid-Seashire, would prepare briefcases filled with large sums of money ahead of time. 22, Phelps Street, Lone Charity Bursary Foundation Headquarters. Klein walked through the main door and went straight to the 2nd floor where he found the reception room for directors. As an honorary director who occasionally participated in certain work, he didn't have an office here, but he could use the reception room. He clenched his right hand into a fist and held it to his mouth, deliberately coughing before stepping into the reception room. In there, he sat on the sofa. After a short wait, he stood up again and said to Richardson, who was waiting beside him, "I'll first head to the washroom." After buttoning his coat, Klein stepped out of the room and happened to meet Justice Audrey walking out of her own office. This noble lady was wearing a rather simple dress today. It was white adorned with dark green. Her sleeves and collars had frills, and at her chest were layers of intercrossed lace that formed a bow tie-like flower. She didn't even wear any jewelry. She had a girdle which he couldn't tell, but near her left arm, her clothes clung to her skin when the wind blew, allowing a slight protrusion to appear. "Good morning, Miss Audrey." Klein wore a look of pleasant surprise as though it was a chance encounter. Audrey glanced at the good-looking Dwayne Dantes with grey sideburns and replied with a smile, "Good morning, Mr. Dantes. She had wanted to cheerfully say "long time no see" to snide at him for not being to the bursary foundation ever since the opening ceremony. But considering how their relationship was that of acquaintances, she held back from saying such words. Klein rubbed his temples and shook his head with a wry smile. "I'm very sorry that I'm only coming today. I've been very busy recently. I can foresee myself being even busier in time to come. I might make a trip to the southern continent to handle certain matters." The reason why he specially came was that he wanted to inform Miss Justice that he was leaving Backland for some time. It was to express his sincerity, hoping that this noble lady could help him watch the bursary foundation and allow it to be operated smoothly. To Klein, he wished from the bottom of his heart that the bursary foundation could help more of the poor that required assistance. Southern Continent. Audrey interpreted the sincerity in Dwayne Dantes' words as she asked in surprise. Klein laughed and replied, "For business." At that instant, the first thought that came to Audrey's mind was, which Sequence 5 is about to lose his life? Upon sensing Miss Justice making some unpleasant assumptions, Klein added, "It's a partnership with the military for the sale of some necessities." What's the meaning behind this? Dwayne Dantes' identity is used to probe intel from the military. Audrey was somewhat enlightened as she raised her right hand and gestured 4 times in a clockwise fashion. She said with a bright smile, "May the goddess bless you so that everything goes smoothly." After habitually saying that, she sensed that there was something discordant about that. She had wished that the goddess would bless a blessed of Mr. Fool. This is probably closer to a curse, right? Will Mr. Gehrman Sparrow be angry? No, he's actually a kind-hearted person deep down. And I did it without any malicious intent. The one who returns from the southern continent is probably another blessed who's playing Dwayne Dantes, right? Will it be a demigod? Audrey didn't notice it as her thoughts wandered. Klein gave an exasperated smile as he equally drew the crimson moon on his chest in a familiar manner. May the goddess bless us all. And that she doesn't smite us with divine punishment, he added silently. Following that, he spoke as though it was a casual chat. Have you been going to the schools to do some promotions lately? Yes. When this was mentioned, Audrey's expression seemed to radiate. She was proud and happy that she had finally done something substantial. Just as she nodded with some strength, her green eyes revealed a look of sadness. After visiting a few public primary schools, I found many of the children there very pitiful. To save money, they bring their own rye bread for lunch, matching it with a cup of water. Upon saying that, she looked at Dwayne Dantes and said, somewhat embarrassed, I know that they're temporarily not bringing me along to the night schools and Sunday schools to prevent me from seeing something worse. But I can imagine things just like those workers who can only live for a few years once they start working at the factories. This was something that the World Gehrman Sparrow had once told her. It was the first time she knew of the real situation of the lower class of Backland, but having not seen them with her own eyes, all she could do was rely on her imagination. Klein sighed and said, perhaps it's worse than you can imagine. There's no need to worry. Once you showcase your ability and win their trust, you will become one of them. Okay. Audrey nodded, as though in thought about how she could showcase herself better. Klein didn't continue on the conversation. After all, this was only their third meeting. They had only exchanged a few words previously, so having too long a conversation easily garnered suspicion. He pointed at the washroom and apologized before opening up his gate to walk over. Audrey looked at Dwayne Dantes' back and fell silent as she muttered, what will it be like if it's worse? After receiving a reply from Mocht, inviting him to the East Bala Military Veterans Mess in the evening, Klein followed his plan. Hence, he visited Dr. Aaron at 4 in the afternoon. Mr. Dantes, your butler didn't inform me of the reason for your visit. As his wife was about a month from being due, Dr. Aaron had declined most of his work, and most of the time he had stayed at home. Towards the sudden visit of Dwayne Dantes, who he wasn't too familiar with, he was rather perplexed. Furthermore, with him not being good at interpersonal relationships, he posed the question after exchanging some pleasantries. Klein smiled. This is the thing. I might be heading to the southern continent soon. As you know, the weather there is humid and hot. There are all kinds of insects and diseases there. I wish to prepare some medicine ahead of time to prevent any accidents from happening. I wonder if you have any suggestions. I'm really sorry, but you are the only excellent doctor I know of. Dr. Aaron accepted his explanation and began seriously thinking before giving him the names of some medicine. Towards the end, Klein, who had written a note filled with words, used the excuse of a stomachache to use the washroom on the first floor. The washroom's mirror suddenly darkened as though it was covered by a thick shadow. And in the middle of the shadow, a black pram slowly steered near. In it was a blurry child wrapped in silver silk. What is it this time? Will Ossepin questioned using his bright voice. Klein coughed dryly and forced a smile. You should have heard that I'll be heading to the southern continent. I don't wish to miss your birth, so I would like to know when you plan to have your birthday. Will Ossepin sucked at his thumb and said, I don't know. Even an angel can't control when he will be born. Klein asked in surprise. Will Ossepin replied hesitantly, You don't understand. I've already identified 3 dates. They have unique meaning when it comes to fate, but I haven't decided. I still find it blurry. Perhaps only when the time comes will I suddenly understand what I should do. Is this decidophobia? It also gives the strong vibes of a charlatan. Klein crossed his hands and indiscernibly rubbed them. Then how would I be able to receive notice in time so that I can return in time to complete the transaction with you? Oh, that paper crane can no longer be used. Chapter 887, Familiar Figure Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Upon hearing Klein's question, the infant wrapped in silver silk raised his fleshy arms and threw them up. I can't do anything about it either. I'm still in my mother's womb. Although you can no longer write on that paper crane, it can still help me locate you. If there's anything, I will inform you. Klein had already expected such an answer from Will Ossepin. He maintained his smile and explained, that paper crane is already damaged. I think it will have problems locating my position. Following that, he gave his suggestion, perhaps we can do this, you can summon my messenger when you're born to write to me. He wasn't too worried that Will Ossepin's birth would result in anything abnormal, causing the snake of fate to have to change locations while in a baby's body. That would prevent him from contacting him again. Inside the black pram, Will Ossepin gaped his mouth before closing it again, momentarily not giving an answer. After a few seconds, the infant's mouth curled and said, Do you think that's realistic? Not only are you getting a newborn to write a letter to you, he still needs to hold a ritual and summon a messenger. Klein chuckled and said, But you're a snake of fate. The laws of nature still need to be respected. Will Ossepin threw down his arms and smacked the cushion beside him. This infant thought for a moment and said, Let's do this. Get someone to watch this area. Once they realize an infant is born, they can immediately inform you. Klein's eyes darted about for a while before saying, That works. On this matter, he had many people he could get help from. He could hire a gangster through Sharon and inform him via his messenger, or he could get the usually free Emlyn White to do it. He could also hire bounty hunter, Miss Zio, letting Miss Magician be responsible for informing the world Gehrman Sparrow of the developments. He could also get a Rhodes to take note of the surroundings and report to him through a one-way communication method. However, that fellow, Emlyn's nose is very sharp. I wonder if he will smell the placenta blood and be able to identify what it truly is. If that's the case, it might result in him suffering the impact of seeing a mythical creature. His intelligence will drop and he will turn mentally unsound to the point of his body mutating. Klein hurriedly asked before Will Ossepin's pram retreated into the shadows, I have a, teacher who I haven't been in contact for a while. Can you help me read his current fate? His name is Isaac Eggers. As Mr. Isaac hadn't replied yet, Klein couldn't help but feel worried. Back when he used the copper whistle to do a divination above the grey fog, all he saw was a silent and deep darkness. He heard a dragged out and distant breathing, making it impossible for him to interpret what the dream meant. Will Septon sucked at his thumb and said, "He's in a state of metamorphosis. It might be good, but it might also be bad. That's all that can be seen because that teacher of yours has something special on him." Something special? Something directly derived from death's godhood? Metamorphosis. This is referring to Mr. Azek's recovery of more memories, so he's in a slumber to recover his corresponding strength? Klein thought as he bowed. "Thank you for your answer." Will Septon turned his head and looked to the side. Klein thought and gave a warning. "Based on what I know, Blasphemer Amon is here in Backlund. Of course, it's most likely an avatar." Will Septon was taken aback for a moment before chuckling. "It's a bane for you, but a boon for me. Amon and Ouroboros are absolute enemies. No, a more accurate description is that he hates the true creator. Amon is often thinking of means to pull him down from his throne as a god, while Ouroboros is loyal to that evil god." After saying that, the black pram retreated into the shadows as everything was restored to normal. Amon hates the true creator. I'm increasingly convinced that the true creator was one of the participants in the sharing of the ancient sun god. He is the black infant in the middle of the storm angel, white angel, and wisdom angel. Klein breathed a sigh of relief. He took 2 steps forward, turned on the tap, and washed his hands. In the evening at the East Bala Military Veterans Mess. Klein didn't immediately meet the long-faced Colonel Calvin. After he placed the briefcase with £10,000 into a heavy safe deposit box, he followed Mock to have a buffet meal at this high-end club. The dishes here mainly served Southern Continent cuisine. There was cream bread made from tapioca flour, ice cream dripped in the berry juice of a lilac tree, assorted seafood broth with coconut milk and palm butter, cow innards that was cooked with pepper, tomatoes, and onions, Hajenti seared roasted meat, broth made from Paws Valley's delights, as well as steak and roasted squid. Compared to other places, the ingredients used here were rather high-end. The flavors were also in authentic Southern Continent styles, leaving Klein rather satisfied. If not for his need to maintain his image, he felt that eating a mouthful of seared roasted meat and having a mouthful of ice cream would be an excellent feeling. Indeed, I prefer food that has stronger flavors. The thing that satisfied me the most today was that aperitif. If Member of Parliament Mocked hadn't mentioned it in passing, I would have thought that it was a lightly flavored fruit juice. The pale gold liquid with 2 lemons soaked in it and a few pieces of ice makes it sweet but a little sour. There's no alcoholic taste to it, and it's refreshing. It instantly just draws away the heat from the body. Klein placed his napkin on the plate as he recounted the feelings he just had. At this moment, Mocked returned from the washroom. He smiled as he bent down and whispered into Dwayne Dantes' ear, "Same room as before." "All right." Klein got up, went to the room with the safe deposit box, and took out the small leather briefcase with £10,000 before heading over to the activity room where he had previously met Colonel Calvin twice. Calvin, with his long face, was already waiting inside. When he caught sight of the briefcase in Dwayne Dantes' hand, he got up with a smile. "You really are a gentleman of action. I like such attitudes when handling matters." As he spoke, he extended his right hand and shook Dwayne Dantes' hand. Klein then handed the briefcase to him and said with a humble smile, "As a merchant, if one isn't decisive and fast when facing an opportunity to make money, that means that they aren't suitable for this occupation." Calvin sat back down and opened the briefcase in front of Dwayne Dantes and mocked. He roughly counted the neat stacks of cash. He quickly completed the confirmation check, closed the briefcase, and looked up at Dwayne Dantes. "What other thoughts do you have towards the exact details of the transaction?" Klein deliberately wore a look as though he was organizing his words. After a few seconds, he said, "I'm planning on heading to the southern continent soon, to West Balam. Seeing Calvin and Mocked show signs of surprise, he added, I have some matters that aren't convenient to do while bringing plenty of firearms. And to make the transaction go smoothly, some advanced preparations are required. Heh, I have to put enough importance on this matter. It's a business worth tens of thousands of pounds. I'm thinking of first heading to West Balham to contact clients who have such needs, and to clear out any obvious obstacles. At an agreed-upon time, I'll contact you via telegraph and head to East Balham's border to retrieve the goods. Calvin pondered for a moment and said, You can send me a telegram after June 20th. I'll give you the details later. In short, after I receive the telegram, I'll inform the officer there and get them to pass the countersign and password to the designated personnel for them to head to the warehouse. Will you need any auxiliary personnel for protection during this time? When do you plan on leaving? I only wish to find a place to hide in West Balham where there's no Rose School of Thought. The rest can be left to Danitz. When do I leave? I obviously wish to leave today and arrive there today, but that will incur suspicion. Klein considered for 2 seconds and said, There's no need for any security for the time being. In certain places in the southern continent, having such auxiliary personnel is the main cause for causing conflict. Don't worry, I have plenty of friends in West Balham. Without bringing anything of value, my safety can be guaranteed. As for when I'm leaving, my answer is as soon as possible. Calvin thought for nearly a minute before slowly nodding. I'll send someone to receive you after dinner tomorrow. The military will have an airship that needs to send goods and personnel to Desi Bay. And it's just a short distance to the southern continent via ship from there. If everything goes smoothly, it will just take 2 to 3 days. Even if there's a storm on the way, requiring a detour of the sea route, it will still take a maximum of a week. Thank you. Klein sincerely stood up and bowed. From his point of view, leaving Backlund with the military was safe enough. He wouldn't be made a target of suspicion. After discussing some details, Klein got up and bade farewell and returned to the foyer in preparation to leave. In the foyer, beside the dining table, there were nearly 10 military-clad or casually dressed men holding a cup of wine gathered. They were chatting and laughing about the recent rumors. When Klein swept his gaze over, he suddenly found a figure somewhat familiar. The man was more than 185 meters tall but less than 9 meters. He had rather long arms, and his feet were faced outwards to a certain degree. His shoulders were abnormally broad, causing his black suit to appear rather tight. This. Klein's mind raced as his nerves tensed up. He had already recalled the source of the familiarity. It was the demigod that met crazy Captain Connors that night. He was the demigod suspected to be working for a particular faction of the royal family, one who was supervising the human trafficking. Although this high-sequence beyonder was previously wearing a black hood that interfered with divination, preventing his appearance from being exposed, Klein remembered the traits of his body. That was what a faceless was good at. Chapter 888, A Shocking Glance Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. For a second, Klein's act of casually sweeping his gaze paused on that familiar person's figure. He immediately sensed the abnormality in his reaction since a demigod's spiritual perception wouldn't fail to notice it. His back muscles tensed up as his mind raced, producing figurative sparks. He didn't immediately move his gaze away as he continued looking at the demigod suspected to be from the Black Emperor pathway. He smiled at Mocked and said, This place really isn't just for veteran officers. This sounded like a result of careful observation, but it was nothing but meaningless chatter. Mocked chuckled. Any club will exceed its original restrictions when it further develops itself. His answer didn't seem to offer anything, but on careful consideration, it did seem to imply something, or perhaps something that was the complete opposite. At this moment, the broad-shouldered and long-armed gentleman in a black suit had also naturally turned his head. He looked at the two men, and he noticed that the tycoon who had donated £15,000 was looking at him and his companions while engaging Member of Parliament Mocked with a whisper. This made him feel that his look of surprise was more of a natural reaction towards learning of his occupation. Then, he retracted his gaze and continued his topic of conversation. And at this moment, Klein's back was covered in a layer of cold sweat, and his legs were going limp. Although he had, in a way, faced the demigod before and had even fought with him, to have such a close encounter in such a small place, with danger happening in a split second, this was a first. And more importantly, he was far from prepared to face a demigod. Not only did he lack a marionette, all he had on him was Death Knell, Azek's copper whistle, and the adventurer's harmonica. The sea god's scepter was impossible to bring on his person. Furthermore, the usage of it had strict environmental limitations, otherwise, it would result in massive damage. If he kept Grozel's travels on him for too long, he might be pulled into the book world. When that happens, it would become troublesome trying to exit it. Creeping hunger was still lacking a seal, so it needed to feed every day. Unless necessary, it was impossible to take it out ahead of time. The Fate Siphon charm was made from a worm of time, so it was an unknown if it would attract him on. Unless he could use it very quickly, Klein obviously lacked the courage to bring it on him. If the demigod who was suspected to be from the Black Emperor pathway had discovered something wrong with him, there was only one optimal solution he could think of. It was to blow the harmonica and summon Miss Messenger to get her to help him escape Backlund via the spirit world. He had never thought of letting Rionette Tinker engage in a direct battle while he held Death Knell from the side to find an opportunity to fire. This was Backlund, the home ground of the official Beyonders. With Miss Messenger's unique appearance, that man could easily pin a crime on her, and what awaited Klein would be a joint attack on him. There was bound to be increasing numbers of demigods and powerful sealed artifacts. How harrowing. Klein moved his gaze away in a manner that adhered to logic. Using the clown's ability to control his legs, he walked to the door in a completely normal manner. He didn't ask mocked who those people were, to appear uninterested as a way to prove that it was all just a casual glance. However, that person turning to look at him had exposed his appearance to Klein. He had thick but unmessy black brows with a short and hard crew cut of the same color. He had dark blue eyes and a high nosebridge with a bushy mustache spreading out from his mouth. He had a long face with accentuated outlines as well as callous curves. He had strong masculine vibes and was probably in his 30s or 40s. It was difficult to determine. Just on his appearance alone, Klein felt that he looked more like an Arbiter Pathway's demigod rather than one of the Black Emperor pathway. Of course, this demigod's bearing was closer to that of a warrior's, but he was too short. Having had a clear look at him, Klein didn't need to inquire further. He could directly get a Rhodes to answer him. Even if he was still wary of the magic mirror, he could always commission Miss Zio, Miss Sharon, and company to do a simple background check. He believed that no matter how well hidden this demigod was, it was unlikely for him to have a low-ranking position. It would be easy to figure out who he was. 1 step. 2 steps. 3 steps. Klein left the East Bala military veterans mess in a normal manner. When he boarded the carriage, he leaned on the wall, closed his eyes, and kept silent for a few seconds. Inwardly, he let out a long sigh. The disconnected trail of clues leading to the truth of the great smog of Backlund has finally been connected again. He didn't open his eyes or say a word, as though he was recounting the business problems he had previously discussed. But in fact, it was to quell his emotions that had been left in an upheaval. During this process, Klein realized that Richardson had tried to speak a few times, only to shut his mouth again, doing so as though he was stumped. Ultimately, he didn't say a word, focused on preparing Marquis black tea for his employer. Due to his previous encounter, Klein momentarily didn't have the capacity to be bothered about him and had pretended to not notice it. Amidst the silent atmosphere and grinding wheels, they returned to 160 Backlund Street. When he reached the 3rd floor, Klein was just about to head for the bathtub that had been prepared by the lady's maid when Richardson, who was holding his hat and cane, took 2 steps forward and respectfully said, "Sir, are you heading to the southern continent soon?" Yes, Klein replied frankly. He had even prepared £500 in cash to hand to housekeeper Tanaja for daily expenses needed for the Duane Dante's residence during his time in the southern continent. Meanwhile, he had a deeper understanding of the importance of having a butler and valet in high society. There were many things that a master couldn't keep from them, therefore, any conflict in faith and political inclinations necessitated a change. Richardson hesitated and said, "Sir, I was born in the southern continent and am fluent in Dudenese. I'm also very familiar with the various local traditions. I should be of help to you." Dudenese was a common language of the ancient Balam Empire. In present-day East and West Balam, the citizens still used this language. Only people of the middle and upper class knew foreign languages like ancient Faisak, Loanese, and Intis. Klein felt lucky with regards to this because ancient Balam was once a unified empire with a true god existing in it. Therefore, although the different states had different accents, they all used Dudenese. The written language was likewise the same. This saved him plenty of trouble. If I were to encounter dozens or more than 100 dialects and languages, that would be a headache. However, Dudenese and ancient Faisak doesn't belong to the same system. I'm unable to easily grasp the various branches by learning the latter. Finding an interpreter is necessary. Oh, Anderson seems to be fluent in Dudenese. He never seemed to mention having any problems with communication in West Balam. Klein finished listening to Richardson when he suddenly realized what was stumping him. As a valet, he needed to follow whenever his employer headed out. There was no need for a butler to do so. This also meant that a valet was like a secretary for the master's daily life. In certain cases, they would also play a role as a business secretary. Clearly, Richardson enjoyed his life in Backland and everything it had to offer. He didn't wish to return to the southern continent to see scenery or matters that would make him recall his past, therefore, when he got into the carriage, he had tried to mention his traits but was unable to voice it out. He wished that Duane Dantes could find a better candidate. Klein thought for a moment before saying, "I can tell that you don't like the southern continent. Why are you telling me this?" Richardson slowly bowed his head and looked at his toes. "You gave me a chance to gain experience to mature. I believe I can help you. Very simple feelings of gratitude. If you hadn't said so, no one would know that you knew Dudenese. After all, you were born and raised in an East Balam colony manor." Klein carefully sized up Richardson, chuckled inwardly, and made some silent poignant comments. However, he didn't plan on letting this valet of his follow him to the southern continent. Firstly, it would make it inconvenient for him to carry out certain operations. Secondly, if he was recognized by some Nation Re-establishment Society member of the numinous episcopate, it might end up affecting the rest of his life. Klein laughed and replied, "I have plenty of friends there. They're all fluent in Dudenese and are aware of the traditions there." You have more important things to do. Stay in Backland. Help me deliver some gifts to my friends at fixed periods of time. I'll be giving you a name list when the time comes. Also, read more papers and take note of investment opportunities and also perform on-the-ground checks. Finally, give me a corresponding report. I will get Ma'am Tanaja to specially prepare some funds for this." Richardson was somewhat surprised before saying in pleasant surprise, "Yes, sir. I will work hard." At that instant, he felt that he was being put in an important position as his eyes blurred up. From the moment he was born, this was the first time he felt hope for his future. It was something to look forward to. After dismissing Richardson, Klein took a comfortable bath to soothe his tense nerves. Then, he wore his pajamas and returned to the bedroom. Taking a pen and paper, he drew a symbol that was a mixture of concealment and mystery prying. The full-body mirror's surface ripples with aqueous light as silver light formed Loanese text, "Exalted Great Master, your puny, loyal and humble servant, Herodes, is here to answer your summoning. Are you about to leave Backland again?" Klein nodded and said, "Yes. Without waiting for Rhodes to mention that he could question it, he asked, "Can I still contact you in the southern continent?" "Of course. As long as you take out that magical radio transceiver." On the surface of the mirror, silver words quickly formed. "However, you cannot leave it out in the real world for too long or use it too frequently. There are plenty of beneficiaries of the Mother Tree of Desire. She can use it to detect you." Klein nodded gently and asked, "What do you know about the Mother Tree of Desire?" Rhodes suddenly fell into silence. It was only after a very long time that its silver luster formed a complete sentence. "I don't dare to mention it, nor do I dare to show it." Don't dare to mention it or show it. At least for Rhodes, the Mother Tree of Desire is definitely stronger than Sequence 1 Zerodal. No, it's even stronger than the Monster Pathway's uniqueness, die of probability. There should be a way to circumvent the restriction to get Rhodes to display the corresponding information, such as bringing it above the gray fog. Heh, how is that possible? That won't happen unless I'm already an angel and in complete control of that mysterious space. Klein's eyes moved slightly without pressing the question. He asked, "It's your turn to ask." The full-body mirror's silver light turned brisk, forming a new sentence, "Great Master, what other instructions do you have for me?" Nice question. Klein thought for a moment and said, "After I leave Backlund, take note of Dr. Aaron Sirius's family. Once his wife gives birth, remember to mention it to me when I summon you." After careful consideration, Klein believed that leaving this matter to Rhodes was for the best. After all, no one could monitor Dr. Aaron's residence 24 hours a day. And what Klein needed to do was to switch residences at the end of the month to turn on the radio transceiver once. "All right, Master," the words on the mirror reflected Rhodes's mood. "I have a question." "Speak." Klein nodded, giving permission. This time, the sentence Rhodes presented were filled with pauses as though it was very hesitant. "Great Master, what relationship does that child have with you?" It seemed to be puzzled why a supreme ruler above the spirit world would pay so much attention to a yet-to-be-born infant. I've already said that it's the yet-to-be-born child of Dr. Aaron Series, yet Rhodes fails to notice anything special about Wuxia. When it comes to hiding his fate and special traits, a snake of fate is far better than the angels of the other sequences. However, the magic mirror is able to accurately give me the time when Tail Devourer Ouroboros would leave Backlund. It's likely that Wuxia's reboot makes it difficult for high-leveled existences to notice anything. This might also be why he can avoid the angel of fate. Klein answered in enlightenment, "Friends. About being Wuxia's godfather, it was just a casual thought." He didn't have much confidence about that or dare to force it, afraid that he would annoy the snake of fate. Only friends. Rhodes revealed an inexplicable sense of disappointment in its words. "Great Master, you can ask a question." Klein thought for a moment before saying, "Do you know who the person I met at the East Bala Military Veterans Mess is? If you aren't sure who I'm referring to, I can draw him for you." In the dark and deep mirror, aqueous light surfaced, producing a cold and bearded man with dark blue eyes. It was none other than the demigod Klein suspected to be of the Black Emperor pathway. Meanwhile, the corresponding text appeared beneath the picture. "He's Brigadier General Konas Kilgore. He's from MI9 and is a deputy director. He's known to be a Sequence 5 from the lawyer pathway, but he wields a powerful sealed artifact." Mi-9. Brigadier General. Deputy Director. From the looks of it, he's the representative of the spy network for the faction of the royal family. Klein memorized the information given to him by the magic mirror. But for a moment, he was at a loss as to the direction for the investigation. After all, Konas was a demigod, and be it spying or sounding him out, it would easily put him in an alert state regardless of whether he did it himself or commissioned someone else. It was bound to provoke revenge. The only reliable idea he had was to rely on Miss Justice to do some gathering of information. Not only was her standing high, she also had the social connections to obtain the relevant information. Furthermore, she was a sequence 6 of the spectator pathway. She could steer topics of conversation without garnering any suspicion, allowing her to complete her observation stealthily. I have to say that, although spectators have lacking combat abilities, they are a force to be reckoned with in other aspects. Besides, with the powers of psychiatrist and hypnotist, spectators can control and guide the direction of a battle to a certain extent. Klein reflected over it as he wondered what else he could ask Rhodes about. At this moment, the light from the mirror's surface faded and formed a new sentence. "Great Master, do you wish to know the mastermind behind Quarren's suicide? You are even providing me intelligence on your own accord. Although I've already extricated myself from this matter, I haven't been too actively involved in it and am just awaiting the Nighthawk's investigations. I didn't even find it necessary to ask about it." Klein chuckled inwardly and nodded. Yes. The full-body mirror produced a silver line of text: Royal Family's consultant, Vin Rambis, one of the counselors of the psychology alchemists. Psychology alchemists? Royal Family's consultant? Klein immediately frowned. He found it difficult to determine what the psychology alchemists were plotting, or if a particular faction of the royal family was dissatisfied with the current political climate and was attempting to nudge it. The psychology alchemists isn't like I imagined, being focused on academics and the exploration of ancient ruins. Do all secret organizations attempt to grasp power at a certain point to influence the world? An anchor's requirement? I wonder if Vin Rambis's ploy is a personal act or decided by the organization. If it's the former, that's still alright, but if it's the latter, it will be easier for Miss Justice to encounter difficult choices as her standing in the psychology alchemists rises. Klein's thoughts whirred as he returned to the question-and-answer game. He deliberated and asked, "What else do you wish to say?" If anyone else had asked such a question, Klein believed that Rhodes would smite them with lightning or use another malicious method to tease them. However, he believed that, as a supreme ruler above the spirit world, he had the right to ask such a question. It was also an opportunity to test Rhodes's bottom line. The silver light on the full-body mirror's surface transformed into another new line without any hesitation. "Great Master, Amon is already in Backland as you expected. As it's his avatar that came, I can see it." "What do you mean as I expected? When did I expect it?" Klein pricked up his brows and said, "I'm aware." "All right. That's it for today. I'll summon you again using the radio transceiver if I come across any more questions." "Yes, Master, your loyal and humble servant, Rhodes, is constantly awaiting your orders." "Goodbye." The mirror's surface depicted an emoticon of waving a handkerchief. Klein watched in silence until everything was restored to normal. On the second day, which was a Monday, he had already made preparations to head to the southern continent. Apart from the luggage that contained 2 sets of clothes, 500 pounds, and some miscellaneous clothing that was meant for show, he threw the remaining 12,125 pounds and 87 gold coins above the grey fog. The reason why he was so careful was because Klein had a deep impression on his last death and resurrection. If he hadn't had an anonymous account with a few £100 from Miss Justice, he had no idea how long he had to wander the streets. Perhaps he had to really get a job at the circus to be a clown, or he'd have to head to a certain gangster leader's place to borrow some money. Seeing that it was almost 3, Klein headed up above the grey fog, prepared to have this week's tarot gathering. He had previously done a divination here, and he received the conclusion that, unless they were in the same building, Blasphemer Amon was unable to detect a tarot club member being pulled up into the mysterious space above the grey fog. Before long, dark red beams shot up in the Grand Palace, materializing into blurry figures. Having confirmed that she was restarting her psychology lessons this week and having re-established contact with the psychology alchemists, Audrey looked towards the end of the long bronze table in a relatively good mood. She stood up, raised the corners of her skirt, and bowed. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." Opposite her, the hanged man also got up and bowed, but he had another question on his mind. He had originally promised the world German sparrow that he would give him the mystical item made from the ocean songster Beyonder characteristic last week. But to his dismay, something happened to the artisan, preventing him from handing it over in time. With regards to this, Alger planned on explaining the reason to the world at the tarot gathering before personally taking action to resolve the problems of the artisan. After the bow and exchanging greetings, Cadlia was just about to say something when she saw Mr. Fool rap the edges of the model table. This dull knock made all the tarot club members tense up. They had no idea what Mr. Fool was about to say. It must be something serious. Something that's emphasized by Mr. Fool at the beginning must be something serious. Audrey determined inwardly. The Fool Klein surveyed the area and said with a smile, Amon recently came to Backlund. An avatar. Amon. Blasphemer Amon. Derek instantly felt his unpleasant memories become invoked. Be it parasitizing the former team captain, asking, "Are you looking for me?" or coiling around his spirit body like a snake, Amon with his pointed hat was a nightmare he couldn't shirk away from. One had to know that, as a resident of the City of Silver, Derek had seen plenty of terrifying monsters. Only a few could make him feel uneasy and fearful just from a mere recollection. Amon has headed to Backlund where Miss Justice and Miss Magician are living. What does he want? What should they do? Derek suddenly felt nervous for his companions. Amon. This ancient king of angels has returned to the real world. Indeed, when a revolution is about to happen or is descending, the waves of the times will come flooding in. Alger's eyes narrowed as he recalled what Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos had once said to him. Cadlia's thoughts were similar to his. As the King of Angels had reappeared in the northern continent, she could catch a whiff of the unease. A phrase surfaced in her mind, the changing of an epoch. Amon. Angel of time Amon. An ancient king of angels. Audrey trembled in concern. She glanced at the magician Furs and Mr. Moon who wore blank and horrified looks and couldn't help but look towards the end of the long bronze table. Honorable Mr. Fool, can I think of a way to inform the Church of this matter? Chapter 890, Ignore Him, Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Regarding Miss Justice's question, Klein had already considered it some time ago. After all, leaving troublesome problems to the official organizations who could resolve them was his modus operandi. However, Leonard's and Palaz Zorost's reaction made him realize something different. Leonard was a red glove of the Nighthawks. He could easily create an informant to pass the news of Amon being in Backlund to the Church of Evernight, and then let the Archbishop and high-ranking deacons decide on a strategy before carrying out an operation. It wouldn't expose his problem, and it could also quash any latent troubles. Yet, he had chosen to leave using the excuse of a mission. It was obvious to Klein that Amon's appearance was tied to the reason for Leonard's choice of action. He had the suspicion that informing the Church of Evernight might result in unpredictable negative outcomes. Therefore, the angel of the Marauder pathway in Leonard's body had denied this choice of action. And, he was one of the existences who knew the various Beyonder powers that Amon possessed. When I have no idea what to do, the choice is undoubtedly to emulate those with experience. Although there's the gray fog separating us, and any problem will cease at Miss Justice's side, there's no need to take such risks. There aren't many members of the Tarot Club to begin with. Every one of them needs to be cherished. Thoughts flashed through the Fool Klein's mind as he shook his head and said with a calm, humored tone, "Ignore him. Ignore him." Mr. Fool's attitude is as if Amon is a stray dog. In his eyes, only sequence 0 true deities are worthy of attention. That's right. The last time the sun was possessed by Amon's avatar, Mr. Fool had easily cleansed it away. As long as Amon doesn't appear in person, it's not too big a problem for him. The reason Mr. Fool emphasized this matter at the beginning is to warn us to be careful. Alger thought in fearful respect and enlightenment. Audrey similarly interpreted the meaning that it was a trivial matter. She suddenly made the connection. Is Mr. World Gehrman Sparrow's temporary departure of Backland to avoid Angel of Time Amon? To Mr. Fool, although he is still slowly recovering his standing, level, and powers, it's not difficult for him to deal with Amon's avatar. The sun's encounter is evidence. He got his blessed to avoid Amon to not attract the Angel of Time's real body, as this can spoil his plans of awakening. Yes, he emphasized it to us as a warning, worried that we wouldn't react properly when chancing upon Amon. Mr. Fool really shows his concern for us. At this moment, Emlyn had just digested the matter of King of Angels blasphemer Amon's appearance in Backland. Although he was arrogant, repeated tarot gatherings had allowed him to understand what a King of Angels was. It was an existence second to sanguine ancestor Lilith, second to the true deities that sat at the pinnacle sequence. They were the strongest ones who walked the real world. What's going to happen this time in Backland? When the time comes, there will be dead people, the wounded, or the sick everywhere outside. I'll become busy again because of Father. Emlyn recalled his life after the great smog of Backland as he showed signs of fear that such matters would happen again. Furs also felt that the problem was significant. This was because if Angel of Time Amon really wanted to do something, it was very likely that he would inflict damage on a large scale. It was something that she could avoid by hiding at home and not heading out. She silently drew a breath and looked to the end of the long bronze table, worriedly asking, "Honorable Mr. Fool, why is Amon sending his avatar to Backland?" Klein deliberated over his choice of words and looked around the table with a smile. "To look for all of you. To look for us." The sentence seemed to be like bolts of lightning that struck Furs and company awake. It left their spines numb. Right on the heels of that, Audrey made the connection of the reply to "ignore him" from before. She found Mr. Fool like the boundless ocean, and a mere avatar of blasphemer Amon was just a rock. It could only cause a tiny stir and nothing more. Although Amon's avatar came to find us Tarot Club members, Mr. Fool has said to ignore him, so there's no need to bother about him. Praise Mr. Fool. Audrey's nerves that had just tensed up instantly relaxed. Emlyn, Furs, and Derek also figured out something similar. They either leaned back into their seats, exhaled openly, or praised Mr. Fool from the bottom of their hearts. Cadlia hadn't joined when Amon possessed the son Derek, and she had only learned of it during a few of the subsequent discussions. Therefore, she knew little and didn't have deep thoughts about it. She just felt worried over the situation where Amon, a king of angels, was seeking out the Tarot Club members. Why would a king of angels like Amon target the Tarot Club? He likely discovered our organization from the sun. What goal does he have, and why is he so confident? He is targeting Mr. Fool. He can sense the abnormalities of the gray fog. But Mr. Fool said to ignore him. This means that, under normal circumstances, Amon is unable to tell who is a Tarot Club member. With Kings of Angels appearing, is the fifth epoch coming to an end? After Alger relaxed from his tense state, he began thinking about something else. Back when he informed the Church of Storms about Bansi Harbor's problem, his excuse was that he had heard someone at a bar mentioning it. And he had described this person using blasphemer Amon's image. Thankfully, even if the church were to encounter Amon, with the way they handle things, they wouldn't verify and question this matter. And regardless of Amon's performance or because of his identity, they will definitely find him extremely suspicious and place weight on this suspicion. Alger wasn't worried that he would expose himself for this trivial problem. He only believed that it was best that he should be careful and not randomly use high-ranking Beyonders, especially angels and above, as scapegoats. Hence, he warned himself. Although not every high-ranking Beyonder is at the level of any mention of it will be known, or have similar powers, mentioning it excessively might result in me encountering that existence due to the machinations of fate. After all, the higher one goes, the deeper the connections of fate will be. Seeing that the Tarot Club members, especially the three who were in Backland, had already shown signs of wariness about Amon's avatar and had written off the thoughts of being rash and not plan on targeting the blasphemer, he calmed down and leaned back, leisurely looking at everyone as an indication that the floor was theirs. Cadlia reigned in her worries over the northern and southern continent and the 5 seas before looking to the seat of honor at the long bronze table. "Honorable Mr. Fool, I have 3 new diary pages again this time." She remembered vividly that, at the end of last Monday's tarot gathering, she had informed the meaning of the 2 Rosalian characters to Queen Mystic. However, she only received a reply on Sunday. In it were 3 new diary pages and a question of medium length. The place his mind and spirit calls home, is it on that island, or the depths of the cosmos? When Cadlia ruminated over this question, she seemed to sense the emotional upheavals that were happening when Queen Mystic wrote it, unlike her usual calm self. With regards to this, she sighed silently based on her understanding of Queen Mystic Bernadette. In Her Majesty's heart, Emperor Roselle is an unresolved knot. This is the reason why she ultimately doesn't dare to advance to Sequence 2. Klein had no idea what Ma'am Hermit was thinking. All he did was nod and indicated that she could conjure the new Roselle diary pages. Soon, the 3 yellowish-brown goatskin pages appeared in his palm. March 10th. I participated in that ancient and most secret organization's gathering. After many observations, I'm increasingly puzzled over a problem. What does it mean to be the trend of the times? Who defines the trend of the times? If it's really as they claim, when everything ends and the original creator is resurrected from the dead, awakening from his slumber, he would gather everything back into his body to create a new world and new history. Then, there's no need for them to let the times develop according to what they expect of the times. They can quickly come up with all kinds of schemes, such as triggering a world war, a war between angels, or even a war between deities. Wouldn't that accelerate their goals? Or could it be the case that the times is part of the original creator? Only when the times develop according to a certain expectation can he draw energy from it and revive? This isn't scientific. Of course, whatever I see and participate in now isn't scientific at all. Actually, if I had any say, why revive the creator who rides above all? Everyone can just go through the motions and enjoy themselves without any restrictions. Isn't that better? Based on my observations, there are many members who share similar viewpoints as mine. However, there are a number of members who are stubborn and inflexible, strictly abiding to their beliefs. I wonder if they should be called idealists or crazy cultists. What I can't see through the most is that mysterious leader. Old Mr. Hermes told me that this organization began with him. It was organized with people who shared his beliefs and goals. However, he seldom expresses his thoughts, never stopping many of the members who use the organization for their own purposes. At times, I will even forget his existence. He seems to enjoy sitting there, silently watching everyone converse. But on one matter, I witnessed his might. A high-sequence beyonder who had gone against their so-called trend of the times was put forth by him. In 30 seconds, the person became a target of elimination. And I believe that the poor fellow wouldn't survive past summer. Who is he? Some ancient god that survived the second epoch? Roselle had used 2 question marks at the end of the sentence to express his strong doubts. This was something he seldom did, hence, Klein suspected that this was the reason why Bernadette had chosen this diary entry.